Hey everyone, Taraxer here with another video, and in this video I am going to be talking to you about 6 tips that I think you should be trying to implement into your games in order to improve fast. A major part of my own stream is my grind to improve, and while I haven't yet accomplished what I've set out to do, I still think I've learned a few things over the course of this beta that I deem to be essential skills that will help you climb out of those lower ranks quickly. Let's get started. Tip number 1, stop pushing on defense. One of the biggest mistakes I see people at lower ranks do is always be going for flanks and pushing way farther than they need to be. This isn't to say that flanking isn't a viable option, but it needs to be done at the right times. Let's look at Haven for example. Oftentimes, I'll see players start the round on A site and then they immediately look to push A long or A short. If the other team happens to be pushing mid and or C site, you're in luck and you'll have a successful flank most likely. However, most of the time this isn't the case. There will likely be at least one person watching for that flank, or the other team will be planning on pushing a site to gather intel or to full push onto the site. Intel is a huge part of this game, and you and your team have to coordinate together to do so. Disclaimer, I know this might be hopeful wishing. If you're solo queuing with a bunch of people with no mics, we've all been there. However, the point remains true. You can't just try to flank from the start of the round without knowing where your enemy may be. First, let your team gather info, or you yourself can gather info, and then you can make that decision for yourself. Another reason that pushing on defense is not always a good idea is due to the fact that the enemy team may hard push the site. Let's have a look at Haven again. Let's say you have one teammate holding C site, and the enemy decides to hard push C long. If he gets killed without trading one back, the enemy team is going to continue on to C without any problems. If you're flanking from A site, you need to take the longer route instead of rotating through your own spawn. You also most likely have to be walking instead of running through your spawn, as you have no idea where the enemy may be holding. Your team is now facing a 5v3 instead of a more favorable 5v4 if you were to simply rotate through spawn. Don't get me wrong, as I stated earlier, flanking can be a very viable option, especially in Valorant, where you can use many of your own abilities to your advantage. However, you should be trying to gather as much information as possible before flanking, and your team should hopefully have some sort of map control for you to go ahead and do what you do. Tip number 2 is Crosshair Placement. Now I'm sure a lot of you have probably already heard about Crosshair Placement before, but I can't stress enough how important it is. A lot of the time, I still see a lot of people walking around the map with their crosshairs pointed downwards, or they're holding a sharp angle and looking down. A great habit to develop is to always have your crosshairs upwards, and to imagine where the enemy heads are going to be. This is especially true when peeking angles or checking corners. If your crosshair is pointed downwards, you have to take that extra little time to adjust to where the enemy is, while the enemy likely already has their crosshair on you. In a fast-paced tactical shooter like Valorant or even CSGO, those extra little seconds can be crucial and can be the difference between you getting a kill or you getting killed. Now what you should be doing is always having your crosshair looking upwards, right where you think their head's going to be. The game sometimes gives you a lot of hints as to where to line up your crosshair. You can see in line with the top of this tile and the natural wall, you can see right at the top is where his head is if I peek the corner from here. They give you a lot of hints like that, so you should always be looking head level and checking off every angle possible. Right there, like you know that there's a spot there and you should always just be looking there. Tip number 3 is to try and become an in-game leader. A lot of the time when I was playing solo, the communication in-game would be dead silent and everybody would be off doing their own thing. Valorant is a tactical shooter that requires a lot of coordination and information gathering, as I spoke about before. Pro teams always have their own in-game leader, so why would that be any different for lower levels? Something that I found to be especially good is to make an effort at being some sort of in-game leader. And at the start of the game, just say hi to everyone, ask what's up, get the team in a good mood. This of course requires you to have a mic, and if you're playing competitive without a microphone, just know that I'm not a fan of you. Of course, there will always be those toxic players on your team, and that's unavoidable. But if you make a real effort at getting your team to play together, it will at least increase your chances of winning the match. Even if you're not making the best calls, it's better that everyone is together on the wrong page than everyone being on a different page altogether. Play as a team and try to keep team morale up. Nobody plays well when they're tilted, so try to keep that positive energy on the team. Tip number 4 is to stop peeking when you have your abilities out. This was a big one for myself to learn. There are so many times where I could have gotten an easy kill on an unsuspecting opponent, or where I've just gotten killed simply because I was out in the open with an ability out instead of my weapon. With most of the abilities in this game, there is a second or two after you use an ability where you have to pull your weapon back out, and in a quick game like Valorant, each second means life or death. Don't make the same mistakes as I did, and make sure that whenever you're using your abilities, you have some sort of cover to hide behind quickly if you're getting shot at, or just use your abilities from some sort of spot of protection. Continuing in a similar direction, tip number 5 is to stop overexposing yourself to multiple angles. Let's look at hookah on bind. On defense, I see a lot of people trying to hold B short, and this is exactly what they do. When you peek like this, you're opening yourself up to getting shot at by multiple angles without any knowledge of where the enemy may be. Instead, get in the habit of checking off every possible angle one at a time, without exposing yourself to other angles. By doing this, you're reducing the possibility of you being shot at from 2 places at once, and it puts your mind in the habit of checking everything in the first place. Don't forget to check all of your corners. Don't like that.
Oh my goodness.
Ooh, no one checked that. The last tip is about not changing your sensitivity every time you play the game. One day, you could be feeling like you're undershooting the enemies, so you go ahead and increase your sensitivity. The next round after that, you start overshooting enemies instead, so you go back and lower your sensitivity back down. The more you change your sensitivity back and forth, the less you're training your muscle memory, and the less you're adapting to how to aim properly. Ideally, every time you play the game, you should have the exact same setup and sitting position. This way, you're training your muscle memory, and the more that you play, the more your body and mind will get used to things. That isn't to say you're not allowed to change your sensitivity at all. Experimentation can be good, but try to settle on one that you feel the most comfortable with. A great rule of thumb regarding your ideal sensitivity would be a centimeter per 360 degrees of your play space minus 25%. This centimeter per 360 degrees is called the turn circumference. This is the real life distance your mouse moves when performing a 360 degree spin in-game. For example, if your mousepad was 100 centimeters, then the ideal turn circumference would be 75 centimeters. This allows you to achieve a full 360 degree movement with extra space to spare. For perspective, 80 centimeters per 360 degrees is a very low sensitivity, and 10 centimeters per 360 degrees is very high. Lower sensitivities allow for greater precision, as higher sensitivity can feel twitchy, sporadic, and overall harder to precisely control if you're not extremely experienced. But it will allow you to react and flick very quickly. Experiment for a bit, but then settle on a sensitivity you feel comfortable with and roll with it. If you want to learn more about your ideal sensitivity and more about aiming in general, I've put 2 links in the description below for you to check out. And those are all the tips I have for you to quickly climb out of those lower ranks. They might seem like easy surface level tips, but believe me, mastering these skills will help you improve a ton and will see you climbing out of those lower ranks in no time. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe below. It really means a lot to me and I really appreciate it. It also lets me know what type of content you guys would like to see in the future. Thanks again, I'll see you next time.